Fellas, considering UFC 299 is this weekend, I thought I'd do an interesting concept and rate every big fight on this card. Now, by big fight, I'm not just going to be doing the main card, I'll be including a few prelim fights in here. I'm going to be talking about and rating out of 10, well, I say out of 10, it's going to be sub 5 to 10, the best fights on the card in my opinion. Now, because I've selected the best fights, I don't expect there's going to be too much sub 5s on the card, but we've got 10, which is essentially one of the best fights the UFC has ever produced, and then we've got sub 5, which is this fight should not be anywhere near this card. So yeah, rating all the big fights out of 10 essentially. Let me know if you'd agree down below. Starting off with the first fight, by the way, this is in completely random order. Starting off with the first fight that I'm going to rank, which is, here we've got, Gamrot versus RDA. Gamrot versus RDA, I'm going to give this one a 6 out of 10. Now, I don't mind the matchup. I just think it's a bit of a random matchup. Gamrot, after his win, I know it was a bit of a controversial win because Fiziev got injured, but over his win over Fiziev, I was expecting Gamrot to be in like a #1 contender fight. I mean, it was supposedly meant to be the backup for Oliveira versus Islam. Obviously, he wasn't because they brought in Volkanovski, but he was supposedly supposed to be the backup for Oliveira and Islam. And now I was expecting him to get a #1 contender matchup, and it's RDA. The fight itself, I mean, like I said, it's a bit random. I don't expect it to be a banger. I mean, it could be. RDA's really well-rounded. Great grappler, great striker, coming off a loss to Vicente Luque. And then Gamrot, he's a great grappler as well. Actually, an amazing grappler. And his striking's improving, as we saw in his last few fights. I think it's going to be a pretty decent fight. I'm not expecting it to be a banger. I'm not expecting it to be a war. It is a bit of a random matchup to see RDA at 155 again, but yeah, I think it's going to be a fairly good matchup, fairly average matchup. I'm not expecting big things, and the reason it's a 6 and not any higher is because, again, I'm not sure what we do with Gamrot if he does beat RDA. It's such a random matchup. I don't think it does anything for Gamrot's career. I don't know why he's taking this fight, but yeah, I don't expect it to be a bad fight. I'm not expecting anything massive from it. I'll give it a pure, just, yeah, 6 out of 10 for this matchup. Next fight, Gilbert Burns versus Jack Della Maddalena. This one is getting an 8 out of 10. This one for me is definitely getting an 8 out of 10. This is probably one of the best fights on the card, and I think it has potential to be fight of the night. I mean, their styles are so similar. I said it in the prediction video. Their styles are so similar. You've got Gilbert Burns, who's improved his boxing massively, as we saw in his past few fights, and obviously known for having amazing jiu-jitsu. And then JDM, again, amazing jiu-jitsu, and arguably has the best boxing in the welterweight division. I think this is going to be a scrap. They both want it so bad. Gilbert Burns wants to get back to the title picture and defend his ranking against JDM. And JDM's been on an absolute hot streak in the UFC, coming off a win over Kevin Holland. I think it's going to be fight of the night. I think it's going to be a scrap. And I think Gilbert Burns versus JDM, 8 out of 10. Now, the only reason this can possibly go bad if it's Gilbert Burns imposes a heavy grappling matchup, and because JDM has great defensive submission game and defensive grappling game, it could be a very kind of like a Masvidal versus Burns fight. But JDM's way better than Masvidal, so I trust that it's not going to be a fight like that. I'm going to say 8 out of 10. It's going to be bloody. There's going to be multiple, back and forth. What am I saying? It's going to be a back and forth fight. There's going to be grappling, there's going to be striking. It's everything you want in a matchup. 8 out of 10 for Gilbert Burns versus JDM. I'm excited for that matchup. Next fight I've chosen is Kevin Holland versus Michael Venom Page. I'm giving this one an 8 out of 10 as well. I'm really interested to see the debut of MVP in the UFC, and I'm glad that they've put it against Kevin Holland out of all opponents. I'm glad that they've not given him some, unknown fighter with terrible grappling, amazing grappling, and they've, because if they'd have put MVP against a grappler, someone with semi-decent grappling like a Sean Brady, he would have got mauled. So I'm glad that they've put him against Kevin Holland because stylistically, it's an amazing fight. They're both amazing strikers, they're both showboaters, and they both want to put on an entertaining fight for the fans. You can't go wrong with this matchup. You cannot go wrong. Kevin Holland's not going to impose any grappling against the terrible grappler in MVP because I said that in my prediction video. He's on a big stage. Kevin Holland's not the type of guy to do that. They're both going to put on a fun striking performance. It's fairly 50-50 as well. Some people would be inclined to think that Holland's got this, but even though he's a bit of a can crusher, I think MVP, again, he's so good with his striking, his defense, his offense, the way he moves, everything about MVP. Some people call him the human highlight reel outside of the UFC. It's going to be a fun matchup. You can't go wrong with it. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. I'm super excited to see it. And like I said, I'm glad that the UFC matchmakers put MVP against Kevin Holland out of all the people he could have debuted against in the UFC. So 8 out of 10 matchup. I can't wait for it. Next fight, Gelton Almeida versus Curtis Blades. Now, I'm going to give this one a 5. I think this is probably going to be... I don't think it's going to be a terrible fight. I don't think it's going to be Derek Lewis, Curtis Blades level, where it's like an absolute terrible fight. Not Derek Lewis, Curtis Blades. Derek Lewis, Gelton Almeida level. on top of that, it's not 5 rounds. It is only a 3-rounder. But to be honest, I don't know what people are expecting from this matchup. It's going to be Gelton Almeida trying to hold Curtis, well, not trying to, but he's going to be holding Curtis Blades against the cage so we can secure the takedown. And it's going to be Curtis Blades trying to mix up his grappling with his striking. And that's probably going to be the entirety of the fight. I don't know what people are expecting more from this matchup. I mean, I guess it's kind of good because we get to see Gelton Almeida get tested properly for the first time in his career against a stylistic problem. So I guess that's the fun part about the fight. It's not going to be a war. It's not going to be a stand-up war. It's not going to be no Marab versus Cejudo type of fight either. It's just going to be Gelton Almeida trying to take Curtis Blades down. He's not going to be able to secure the submission because Curtis Blades has great submission defense and he's overall a great grappler. So, I mean, it's going to be Gelton Almeida imposing grappling on an offensive and defensive grappler in Curtis Blades. I don't know what else to say, really. 5 out of 10. Don't think it's going to be a terrible matchup. I don't think it's going to be great, though. So, 5 out of 10. Not bad, not great. Yeah, just 5 out of 10 for that matchup. Next fight we got on the card. Song Yadong versus PT Yan. Song Yadong versus PT Yan, for me, this is going to be a really interesting matchup, and I'm going to put this one in 7 out of 10. It's going to be really interesting to see how PT Yan does against Song Yadong. Now, the reason I'm really interested in this matchup is it's going to be a pure stand-up fight. It's not like we have to see PT Yan get mauled by someone like what's his name, like someone like Marab or an Aljamain Sterling, or he's having to go against a lanky, tall, rangy striker who's currently the champion in Sean O'Malley. He's going against a guy that's going to do exactly what he wants, and that's to stand and bang with him in Song Yadong. Song Yadong's not the most consistent fighter in the UFC, but one thing's for sure, and that's that he hits like a truck. Song Yadong hits like a truck, and I feel like the fight between these two, it's going to go well. It's can PT Yan survive the power of Song Yadong, and is he washed? And can Song Yadong survive the boxing and the absolute clinic that PT Yan has put on people in the past? I think it's going to be a really interesting stand-up fight, and I expect it to go all 3 rounds. But yeah, 7 out of 10 matchup. Can't really go wrong with this matchup. I think it's going to be quite a fun fight, and I'm glad that PT Yan's getting a decent fight, and we're not putting him against a guy like Umar Nurmagomedov, who would absolutely maul PT Yan at this point in the UFC. So fairly good matchup. Then we've got Munos versus Phillips. I think this is going to be a war. Not much people are really talking about this. I'm going to put it on 6 out of 10. Now, I think it's a pretty interesting matchup. I'm not sure why they've given Pedro Munoz Phillips, considering that Munoz has literally, well, he arguably beat, and I don't think he did, but there's still people that think that he arguably beat what's his name, Marlon Vera, who's now fighting for the belt. But yeah, I think Munoz, he's a really entertaining fighter. Listen, he's got a great resume for the bantamweight division, and I think he's going to beat Phillips. Phillips is kind of the gatekeeper for the top 10 at this point, so I'm interested to see how he does against him. I think it's going to be a bit of a war on the feet. I think stylistically, it's a fun fight to watch, so I'm going to say 6 out of 10. I don't think it's going to be one of the best fights on the card. I don't think it's going to be a highlight reel type of fight, but I'm glad that we get to see Munoz in a fun fight because that guy is game. So yeah, 6 out of 10 for that fight. Then we've got the main event, Sean O'Malley versus Marlon Vera. I'm going to give this one, I'm going to put it in 8. No, I'm going to put it in 7, actually. I'm going to put it in 7 out of 10. Now, I'm a little bit worried that this could end up being a boring fight. I've heard a lot of people say there's no way that this is a boring fight, but I've got a bit of a weird feeling that this could be a boring fight because I feel like it could be very point fighty on the feet. I don't think there's a guarantee that it's going to be a fun fight. On the flip side, listen, they've both got a lot of bad blood. The build-up to this fight's been amazing. Another thing I don't like about the matchup, though, is the fact that technically, Vera shouldn't be fighting for the belt. He's not really the best in the division outside of O'Malley, is he? I mean, Marab's better than him. Sandhagen's better than him because he's already beaten him. I feel like there's a long list of contenders that are better than Vera. So if Vera loses, we kind of didn't learn much about O'Malley because he hasn't really fought the best contender yet. So I'm going to say it's a 7 out of 10. It has potential to be great because you're putting 2 people in there with a similar style of striking who have bad blood against each other for a main event. So I think that for that reason, it's got to be a 7. But I'm going to be honest, I don't think it's going to be an absolute war. I don't think it's going to be one of the funnest fights on the card. So I'm going to say that this fight, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. Next, we've got Maquiao versus Maquiao. Very similar names. I'm probably going to stumble over my words a few times in this fight. This is going to be a banger. I mean, Maquiao, Maquiao's a knockout artist. On the feet, he's really dangerous. He's a really big threat on the feet, but the problem is his grappling sucks. He's been submitted multiple times, and we saw in a few of his fights, even in fights that he ended up winning, that his grappling absolutely sucks. And Maquiao, he's not a big grappler. I'm not going to say he's a one-sided fighter, but he's not a massive grappler. He's fairly well-rounded, known for being one of the most entertaining strikers in the UFC. I think it's going to be a banger on the feet. I honestly don't know who to pick, because I feel like well-rounded-wise, it would be the smart choice to pick Maquiao. But then obviously because of the threat of the knockout and the way Maquiao has been looking recently, I want to pick him. But as a fight overall, what would I rank it as a fight? I would say that this fight is an 8 out of 10. You can't, again, unless Pereira, I keep calling him Pereira, unless Maquiao imposes a very heavy grappling game, and it ends up being quite a boring fight, I think it's going to be a stand-up fight on the feet, and you can't really have a boring fight with Maquiao Pereira. So I'm going to say 8 out of 10. Fairly fun matchup, and I can't wait for it. I think it's going to be one of the better fights on the card, to be completely honest with you. And to say it's an early prelim as well, we're getting treated with the prelims. And then final fight, he's in big this time. Dustin Poirier versus Benoit St Denise. This one is going to go in. It's going to go in a 9 out of 10. It's impossible for this fight to be boring. You've got Dustin Poirier, who's essentially one of the most entertaining fighters in the 155 division. His fights with McGregor, his fights with Gaethje, his fights with Chandler, Oliveira, everyone that Poirier faces, the Dan Hooker fight as well, everyone that Poirier faces, it always makes it an entertaining fight. Benoit St Denise, well-rounded, comes to take people's head off. We just saw him against Matt Frivola. That guy comes to have some of the most entertaining fights in the 155 division as well. There's no way that this is kind of going to be a boring fight. It's going to be bloody. It's going to be a war. I believe it's 5 rounds as well, which means it's even better. And there's just no way it's boring. It's Dustin Poirier against the young, hungry Benoit St Denise, and he's going to be facing obviously a veteran in Poirier. I'm super interested in this matchup. I'm glad that Poirier's taking this fight, because it's an absolute banger. And yeah, I can't wait for this fight. I actually think it's going to be the most entertaining fight on the card overall of UFC 299. But yeah, we haven't got any 10 out of 10s. We haven't got any sub 5s. But again, I've been quite selective with the fights that I've chosen. But that is my ranking or rating of all the big fights on UFC 299. Let me know if I should have included any more fights that you think deserve a spot on this list. But if not, let me know what you agree or if you disagree with the rankings. And thank you for watching.